Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. No, your eyes and ears are not deceiving you. Welcome to the Ambassadorial Wing and a special install. Okay, I did not mean to do that. StreamYard is being stupid. Anyway, as I was saying, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Ambassador Wing and a special installment of the Council of One's Babylon 5 review. Hope you all are having a wonderful Wednesday afternoon on this eve of Christmas Eve. And today we are going to be wrapping up our review of season 4 with the episode Deconstruction of Falling Stars. And with me, of course, I have got my fellow council members. You know them, you love them. They're wacky, they're weird. If they weren't, they wouldn't be here. Mountains of Elysium, Fiona Wolf, and Zod Rider. Lady and gentlemen, we have reached the end of this particular journey, and glad to have you all here with me today. So, how are we all doing?
It's the final countdown. There you go. I had to do it. I had to. I'll do good.
It's so good to be here talking about this episode in particular. There's so much here. It's such a beautiful episode.
Yes, a very, very, very old Delenn tells them goodbye, and you know how that insulting that is for Minbari to say goodbye to someone.
So, oof. And to everybody that's hanging out in the chat this afternoon, Archer, Colin, Shane, Nolan, Bureau 31. Good to see all you wonderful people, all you regulars. Appreciate y'all being here. And this, we've got a lot to dig into with this episode, so we're not going to stand on a whole bunch of ceremony any further. We're going to get this party going. And I just want to say before we do get started, from the council to everyone here, whether you're here live or you catch us on the replay, a very Merry Christmas, Happy Festivus, or Happy Holidays, whatever you happen to observe. And we appreciate y'all being here today. So, that all being said, let us begin. Deconstruction of Falling Stars. I open the floor. Where would y'all like to begin?
Ooh. Well, technically, we could jump all over the place if we wanted to.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Jump all over the place because
the timeline it's very historical. They're going in a certain kind of row, but we don't have to.
Yeah, I love all the news footage, all the from this and the way that it's all a lot. It feels like a very futuristic documentary about Babylon 5.
Well, and the crazy thing was they didn't know that they were getting a season 5. And this season was actually very eventful, very action-packed. And then you end the season almost with next to no interaction with the main cast. I mean, you have a bookend of a scene with Delenn and Sheridan at the beginning and the end. You see a little bit of Jakar and Londo. You see a little bit of Franklin and Garibaldi. But aside from that, and except for maybe a holographic representation or a very aged Delenn, the main cast is absent. And
yet their whole actions cascaded enough to where it's like they had to make a historical document of everything, the good, the bad, and the really good stuff, Yeah. It's like, yes!
Right.
And Sheridan saying, they probably won't remember us 1,000 years from now. Oh, boy!
Were you wrong?
The good fact, not the real fact.
Oh,
yes.
Man.
Yeah, actually, with little Mr. Daniel with his little future Yahtzee uniform with the very subtle but not so subtle SS on the collar.
It
It
kind
was
of
Just saying.
Twitter
reminded
before there was Twitter.
of it kind of reminded me a little bit of
Yes.
like Star Trek the motion picture uniforms, just like done up a little bit more Yahtzee like.
Yes.
I
Very
know
much
was that
so.
a lot of the props came from movies. Some of the extra props from 2010, Arthur C. Clarke's the second from the sequel to 2001, were used as the spacesuits and that in the show. So it's not beyond the possibility that there were Star Trek costumes somewhere used.
That wouldn't
Well,
surprise me.
I'm looking at some of the notes for behind the scenes of this thing. Apparently, if they had been totally canceled by here, then it would have been Sleeping in the Light displaying with this episode rather than what we got. But this is actually the first thing they filmed for season 5. And then Straczynski did confirm that the new Earth in the setup was Vorlon. And it kind of makes sense that the humans would make their sun go nova so the Vorlon tech doesn't go crazy on people. Because I don't see the Minbari moving from their homeworld if they can help it.
No, because Minbar, I imagine, they're several million light ways away from our sun, so they're not in any real danger. So,
Oh, man. But yeah, old Delenn was ticked off at those reporters
Well, and
and
you
some
know-
so-called
Okay.
historians. Oh,
okay. Well, and we keep on bringing up Olderland. Why don't we jump into that particular section of the episode, which takes place 100 years into the future from 2262 with the stellar cast by the for the International Alliance broadcasting from Earth. And there's a lot in there, and I've got to say it. I do not necessarily agree with the quote unquote experts that were speaking about Sheridan and Delenn, because they're using a lot of conjecture and a lot of, honestly, there's a lot of bias in there as well. So I don't see things from the perspective that they do. I'm not saying okay.
well, it's also, I think it was to do a contrast of like how much people can forget, even if, say, the Rangers and the Interstellar Alliance keep open records of like historical stuff, which it looks like they did. And these guys are trying to refute it by saying, oh, it's just, Interstellar Alliance propaganda, but it's framed to where it's not really contextualizing anything from like our world or anything like that. It's a reference to whatever happened in those intervening years because they had the telepath civil war and all that stuff. I imagine the next couple of thousand years are going to be rather rambunctious for the Babylon 5 universe. So, and it looks like most of the human commenters, they really aren't on the Alliance's side in terms of or even having somebody that's more objective. But no matter how objective you try to remain, it's really hard to do. Like, no matter what you're doing.
You can kind of see as time goes by how the first segment, the 3 talking heads, 2 were pro Sheridan, 1 was definitely anti Sheridan. Here,
because he worked for Clark.
And that's kind of goes to said that Clark was just a figurehead. His people are still there within power, working away in the background. And within 100 years, though there was not another war, the commentators, I'm using air quotes, academics, were very, well, not exactly hostile, were very negative towards Sheridan and co. So you can see like how Bias's time has affected them. And even in, like I was joking earlier, this is Twitter before it was Twitter. It doesn't matter what the facts say; they have their minds made up before they ever went in, and that's the history they're going to teach.
Yes,
exactly. And I do want to address Colin's question here and everything, because I think it's actually a pretty good one. Given that the internet was at very best in its infancy, how prescient was the remote learning aspect of the lesson? Honestly, Arch, Colin, I think if you're talking about the part that takes place 100 years after the initial scan date from where the individual starts, I think the whole idea of remote learning might have gotten some inspiration, perhaps even from Babylon 5. I mean, if you look at modern technology that we have now, I mean, mobile phones, flip phones were somewhat inspired by the early models of the communicator from Star Trek. If you look at the tablets and so on and the data pads that are used in Star Trek Next Generation, and you look at the iPads and even the cell phones that we have now, again, another inspiration. So I think honestly, Straczynski and I would definitely say Harlan Ellis were very forward looking in the idea that the internet could potentially be used for quote unquote remote learning. So, and I do want to send a shout to the chat, our good friend Jeff B. Merry Christmas to you, my bud, and thank you for tuning in this afternoon. Appreciate it. So, but guys, your thoughts?
One of the things I noticed that stands out to me to that point about like remote learning and the way everything is being depicted, it's amazing to me because if you look at the way this episode was being shown in the documentary-esque format, and then also in the talking heads, the very familiar talking heads format that you see if you watch any cable news channel. This is exactly what you would get. This is the same exact type of thing. And I don't know, looking back at this episode, I don't know if that's great, like what we were talking about, like in terms of forward thinking, or if it's more scary because of the fact that it's so lifelike and literally mirrors the way that kind of content is delivered to us these days. So it's very eerie, the fact that it's so like on the nose and comes off just like a cable news type thing. And that's one of the things I love about it, because it totally does kind of mirror our society, whether it's scary, positive, or whatever. That's exactly what it does. So
I personally think those time skips were picked on purpose to showcase like how even from 100 years out, a lot of stuff can become myth, and maybe people might not actually believe it. So by the time you get to the point where Earth KO'd itself in another, where it literally got scorched like Clark wanted.
This is an example of the more things change, the more they stay the same. That's what I essentially got from it too. Like you're
Yes.
The minister of propaganda. You have all the same kind of stuff that all of the things that it just goes to show you that humanity doesn't really evolve. They just essentially continue to be swine no matter what happens. It's like you sort of, when you at least at that point in the episode where we're getting all of these different feeds, and I'm like, my God, talk about setting humanity back like thousands of years. That's why when we finally get to the last part of the episode, I felt like, well, this is exactly what humanity needs. Humanity needs another Dark Ages, because apparently we haven't learned all that much.
Well, we didn't have a permanent Dark Age, though, because not all of humanity was stuck on Earth at the time, and their true history was still out there, which is why that one brother was indicating that the Rangers would eventually bring back Earth's true history. And the reason why the uplifted first one type human is making a document of everything to send it to New Earth. So that way they wouldn't forget all these little foils that happened to them. Otherwise they might become as stuffy as the Vorlons did, or even the Shadows, just in different directions.
Exactly. Well, the truly interesting part of that particular installment in this episode with the two academics talking with the other gentleman, Exeter, I think was his name. honestly, we might as well go to the Minbari in the room. Is when Delenn shows up. You hear the bells, you hear the chimes, and you're like, "Oh crap, who's here?" And then you see you see Mira Furlan in, I think, honestly, some very good aged makeup, and she's using she's using a walking stick, a very tall walking stick, and
Well, yeah, because you have to assume she's about like over 140 by now.
yeah, 140 for sure. And
Sorry, I was just
go
struck
ahead.
that when I saw it, how I wish that we had Mira for as long, that we didn't lose her this year when I was watching it.
Yeah, yeah, I know. That crossed my mind as well.
And
But
I just like the fact. Oh,
go ahead.
sorry.
It's okay. No, go ahead, Fiona. You're fine. Go
I'm
ahead.
just saying that the best part of that whole thing was she just came out there just to correct the idea. Like, no, he was just a good, honest, hardworking man, and I loved him. And then that's all she had to say. And then they're like, "What?" And then she's like, "You can't." They were like, "Oh, you came this way just to say that," and she said, "You're doing all this just to say less."
You
Like,
can't.
ooh.
You can. You know, it's like that moment is like, and you see the expressions on the two academics' face, because she's chastising them more so than she is the host. And I think that's honestly kind of fitting, because he's not necessarily bashing Sheridan or her either
Right,
way.
right,
He's more of the he's the moderator of the whole thing.
right.
And you see, and when the one guy says, "Well, we would expect you to say that," and she just looks at the guy like, if I was still young enough, I would take this staff and bash you in the face with it.
Oh no, she would
And
bash him in the face.
he just stops dead in his tracks.
It's very easy for people to draw conclusions and make assumptions based on people and events that they have no clue about. It's like if you don't know anybody and all you see is one side of something, it's very easy for you to come out and act like you're an authority on this person, but all you're essentially doing is showing your ignorance. And that's what happened to the academic when Delenn was speaking, because essentially you're coming at this from the perspective of a bias that you don't really know enough. You weren't there. You don't know. You have no real details. All of your information is skewered negatively. So this is how you're going to view things. And the way that she just comes out, and it's like Delenn had like the ultimate mic drop moment. I thought that was honestly the best performance. That was Mira's best performance as Delenn, if you ask me. Up to that point. I mean, she literally just like, I mean, it was mind blowing, and you could tell that everything she was saying was not only coming from her heart, but was also coming from the perspective of, hey, I was there, so I know what happened.
Yeah, exactly, because these academics are looking at historical records that has no context of exactly what happened to Sheridan, Delenn, Franklin, Garibaldi, Ivanova, all of them. They have no context whatsoever of exactly what these individuals went through. And honestly, we do know what they went through. And to see them just kind of rag on Sheridan and Delenn and on everybody that worked alongside them to build the Interstellar Alliance, and it's just like you want to literally reach through the screen, grab them by their jacket collar, and shake them and say, "You ungrateful swine, do you realize this guy literally died and came back from the dead to save the world as you know it? These people bled and fought and suffered and strove to do more than you could possibly ever to imagine to do in 100 lifetimes. These people may not have been perfect, but they lived up to the hilt and they accomplished more than anything a little peewit and intellectual like yourself would hope to achieve, like I said, in 100 lifetimes.
Well,
And that's why when they go forward 1,000 years into the future, they are regarded as legends.
well, the one thing is though, there's the point where Delenn has to also tell them, like, Sheridan cared more than people realized and things like that, and then they try to turn around once it skips the 500-year mark. These guys are trying to use what the Interstellar Alliance knows to be true, and then there's like, oh, we're gonna tell people back home this is what Babylon 5 was really about, and then the Garibaldi AI is like, no. And then the rest of them start rebelling against this because they had to take their personalities from the real thing to make the propaganda piece. And I guess that also ties into a little bit of like how Marcus is brought back later and with the Ivanova kind of memory AI, but it's like, oh my goodness, like they constantly try to break down like what Babylon 5 was about, but they never quite are able to do it because the Interstellar Alliance actually keeps an open kind of, historical record of it. They fail at every corner, which is a good thing though, because eventually, the uplifted version of the humanity learns from it.
Yeah. And I've got Colin's comment highlighted here. It did strike me though that the doubter did have something of a point about leaders' individual actions and enabling others. The truth is, after all, is a three-edged sword. And yes, to that point, at least they did have a point, or there was some fact in what that particular commentator had to say, because it's through the actions of people in positions of power that allows others to be able to affect any type of either positive or negative change. And I think we do need to codify that, because not all leaders are as noble or as respectable as John Sheridan or Delenn or Garibaldi or Ivanova. Some of them can be rather duplicitous and ruthless and despotic.
Well, Shane does mention that. I did see that TikTok video too. That one woman that claimed that ancient Rome doesn't exist or is a lie. And it's kind of like what these guys do in the propaganda piece. It's like there's evidence that all this stuff existed as they're studying it, but they have such a warped view that they'll be like, oh, this doesn't exist. It's like when all sorts of evidence implies that it does. Oh, yeah.
So,
oh man,
I will bring up Lore Bureau 31's comment here. Lore Runner points out that enabling others is a paradox, because if everybody enables somebody, then nobody does something. Yeah, that's true.
oof. I mean, like even in Babylon 5 terms, even though Lorien isn't there, what he did is still felt. You don't always have physical evidence of everything, but that doesn't mean it didn't happen. Oh man, but yeah, this episode was a lot of fun. So if they had to end everything on this episode, if it had been the case, it wouldn't have been a bad way to go out for the series.
It's true.
I was actually using this episode as a thing to bring, and like I mentioned it on other streams, I just haven't been able to upload a video yet, that all the books on the shelf are the different stories told about Sheridan and Delenn, and it could be multiple sides. The Yahtzee guy story, the academic story, so that you could have multiple retellings of Babylon 5, this new reboot retelling, because everyone's story about them, mythical or real, will be different, and hoping that using Brother Alwyn's idea of the Rangers rebuilding better, that it keeps the fandom together for this.
Yeah. Okay. Elysium, I did see your message in the private chat. I'm just not exactly sure how to do that, to be honest with you, because I've never had to deal with this before. So, if you could
Next
tell me
stream,
how.
I'll ask
They're
Captain
popping up
Trek to sort it
everywhere.
out.
Okay, that's fine. So we'll just deal with it as they come. So, and but kind of moving on from the 100 years into the future, I do want to backtrack at least a little bit to the 1 year anniversary of the Interstellar Alliance segment that they have in this episode, and I do want to talk about the commentary by the three, talking heads, as Oddwriter called them, and I want to get y'all's thoughts on that particular part of the episode. Floor is open, guys.
You mean? Well, I do seem to remember they used a clip from when Garibaldi was held in med lab and a little bit beat up, and that does happen later on with the telepaths on the station. Like they should have given them sanctuary. It's like, I think that's unfortunately that telepath situation would have happened regardless of where they were at, because Byron himself was bringing some of that martyrdom along with him. So yeah, I mean it's an interesting way to open up like what season 5 will hold versus like what these guys think like, oh, this should have been the proper way to do things. It's like, man, guys, it looks like things are going to just get more messed up for you because of the telepath civil war later on. It's just the bushfires would have happened everywhere else too. It just happened to fall in Babylon 5's lap initially. Jesus.
Just one little interesting thing I saw, and it's listening to it this time, first time I heard it. They mentioned that on Mars they want to have more political parties because at this time Mars is a one-party state. So I found that could just be a North Korea, or it could be a benevolent political party, but it's Sheridan fought for their freedom, and what they did with that freedom was create a one-party state, and we don't know whether it was for good or bad at this stage. And the idea came to my mind, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Because had number one been in charge, I think Mars would have headed for a more benevolent. Had it been her second or third in command, Mars could have become a very, very dark dystopian place.
Probably. The thing, for me, the interesting thing with that 1 year, with the 1 year anniversary, is the fact that, or was it 1 year, or was it just a few months after? I can't remember.
It's saying it was from January 2nd, 2262.
Okay, so it was just a few days after everything happened, actually.
Yeah, but it does show like little, like maybe about, because I'm trying to remember when Garibaldi was captured in Med Lab by Byron's followers in season 5. It happened a few episodes in, or maybe about halfway.
That particular clip is shown at the 100 years of anniversary of the Interstellar Alliance. That was with the
right.
Yeah,
right.
that was when that was shown, because the one woman, Takashi, calls Sheridan pathological, and he was nothing of the sort.
Yeah. No, that was like a hard decision for everybody, because even though Garibaldi kind of messed up his reputation for a bit, he got it back.
Yeah, definitely. But I found it very interesting, the fact that the politician, the one woman politician, was actually a lot more pragmatic. Not to mention the other gentleman, the older, I forget his name. Dang it. but the two of them were a lot more pragmatic, and they were a lot more willing to give Sheridan and Delenn a chance to give the Alliance a chance to see what it can actually do before just writing them off. And there now, this was an interesting dichotomy in that particular segment of the episode, because when the speechwriter for Clark starts to speak, and he was like, and they go to cut him off, and they're like, wait a minute. He's like, wait a minute, I didn't cut you two off when you were speaking, so at least give me the courtesy of doing the same. And I could say with all honesty, yeah, I don't agree with what the guy has to say, but there's an old saying: give a person enough rope and they'll hang themselves. And I think maybe they should have let him do exactly that. Alicia, thank you. Senator Elizabeth Martre, Leaf Tanner, and Henry Ellis. I wonder if that's an anagram for Harlan Ellis.
Harlan Ellis, I think it was.
Harlan Ellis. Wouldn't
That
surprise
came
me.
from the Babylon Wiki.
Okay, so yeah, I really need to do some digging into that some more, because that was a lot of fun the other day when we looked into all that stuff on Ivanova. So, Zod, you've been quiet for a minute. Your thoughts, my friend?
Guys, I'm sorry. I'm gonna have to go. So have a great stream.
You okay?
Well, sometimes some stuff comes up.
Okay.
But I do find it interesting, though, that the Narn and the Centauri, they didn't die out like Kosh had predicted, because, Londo and Jakar, I think, were mainly responsible for that avenue to be opened up. Because even though they haven't reached First One status by the end of this whole entire series, they're still alive and kicking, and that's hopeful. Like two races that were this close to KOing each other, and then having the Drock mixed up and everything.
Yeah.
Nice.
So
it's like one of Kosh's predictions did not prove true. Yay!
Yes, very true. So, okay, well, moving on from there, what segue would y'all like to dig into next?
The whole Garibaldi AI escapades was pretty interesting. Because again, all of them, once they figured out what was happening, especially once Garibaldi managed to download and send information to the rest of his friends, they're like, "Oh my god, you guys are doing the same thing again? What the heck? What?" Because Delenn and Doc Franklin were trying to we have to get beyond these limits, and while they were distracting Daniel, Garibaldi was like, "I'm looking through the back door. Yes, I can send this to the Alliance, and I'm guessing they're gonna take out your military installation. Oh, daddy boy, they don't attack civilians like you seem to." Oh god, that whole segment. You just hope that more people actually moved off of Earth.
Yes. And I wonder how many more people, I think when we said the Brother Alwyn section, how many people wrote stories where Sheridan was like that, and how many of those stories carried through to later years, and how many of them are on his shelf.
Well, from the looks of it, if they had that kind of tech, they probably ended up doing the same thing on the Alliance side, so people could ask Sheridan and everybody questions from whatever kind of personality, memory date, because you see a little bit of it with that time, space, and incurable romantic thing where, Marcus gets to come back because they finally have the tech. And I think it was in the 32-something era, 3200s, when they finally brought him back. And then he got to download Ivanova into a new body, and he's like, "Wee!" I'm like, "Oh boy!" But apparently, it had the memories of Ivanova up to a certain point, but I don't know how far. But it looks like they had multiple recordings of, their personality and some memories and stuff too. So it makes me wonder what they found in the intervening years to like, ooh, what's this? Oh man. The tech jumps are rather interesting.
Yeah, because especially with the segment with Daniel, the future Yahtzee, they were using holographic imaging that was so good you couldn't even tell there was a hologram per se. And the fact that they were able to download information into those holograms to alter the personality of the hologram, and the fact that they are able to create reasonable facsimiles, or actually pretty decent facsimiles of
Yeah, but again, you have to wonder
of each individual, that it was pretty damn flawless. And even when they altered Sheridan and Franklin, they again were able to alter them in such a way where it almost seemed like this is feasible of what Franklin and Sheridan could have been, but actually we know for a fact they would have never done the things that they are portrayed as doing. And I think they draw a lot of inspiration, and we think deep fake tech is worrying. Yeah, Colin, you're not wrong. So let's see, Sic Transit Gloria Mundi sign. Actually, Bureau, I think I did miss that, but as many times as I've watched this, I'm at this point, I guess I'd be amazed that I did miss that. So I don't exactly know what that means, but that's okay.
I actually make just as I quite think of Sick Transit, I just realized that it was Stephen First, or Veer, was the director for this episode.
Yep. Uh-huh.
Oh man.
Yeah,
but, I'm just so curious. I just want to know at what point were the memory timestamps put into all the holograms? Like, was this a Sheridan and Garibaldi from near the end of their lives, or was it like from when they were in the midst of the Shadow War? It's little things like that are intriguing.
Yeah.
Thank you, Bear 31. Appreciate that. So passes Earth's glory compare. This is how the world ends. Likely comes from 1 John 2:17. Thank you, Bureau. Appreciate that. My Latin is very, very, very rusty, so I do appreciate that. But I find it rather intriguing that even a holographic representation, oh, for heaven's sakes, Art, Colin, you geek. I find it interesting that they were able to get Garibaldi's personality and his skill set so good that ultimately ends up messing them. Ultimately turns out to be a negative for him. So that for me was actually one of the funniest things, that they quite literally screwed themselves. So.
Yep, because Garibaldi managed to figure out who Daniel really was, and basically, okay, so you're just doing this to disguise a surprise. But see, the other side is a lot more merciful than you. They won't attack civilians. Nope, they're going to just, where are you at? You're in a military facility? Uh-oh. Oh, it sucks to be you.
Yeah. Danny,
yes,
can
it
I
does.
Call you Dan? Yes.
Danny boy, Danny.
Yes. So you're a blue check mark. I mean, sorry.
Oh,
you're a real fact type of guy.
But still, it showcases the fact that Garibaldi. So he had the memories of Garibaldi up to the point where he knew that he had betrayed Sheridan and everybody, because he mentions like, yeah, I used to do this and that, and I was kind of like the sneaking residents. But the way he was talking to the guy, it's like, yeah. So that most of these holograms, I'm assuming, had at least up to like maybe their season 5 equivalent of knowledge. But it's just like, oof. That's the reason why I am still pretty disappointed that they're not going to cover other time periods of the show, because this show has a lot of different ages that they could have used to do a continuation, and you wouldn't have needed, the current characters to do that.
Yeah, but here's the cool thing, Fiona. If the show is successful and they decide to do multiple seasons, like mini seasons, we potentially could get seasons that do take place in those futures, in those future periods that we see in Deconstruction.
It still wouldn't be the same, but you guys can have your grand old time. I'll watch from the sidelines and see what comes of it, some of it. But me personally, I'm not too set up on reboots or reimaginings right now, which is why I try not to concentrate it on in my feed. Like, oh boy.
So, but then of course that brings us to, I think, all our personally our favorite segment of the entire episode, and that's of course 1,000 years into the future with Brother Alwyn and Brother Michael. And honestly, this for me, this personally, except for maybe the stellar cast with the two intellectuals and the appearance of Delenn, this is by far, because there is so much lore that is dumped into this that they never get a chance to fully explain. And honestly, I do want to, before we get real further in, I do want to bring up Beer 31's comment here, because yes, I remember that quote very. Earth needs room to expand. The Klingons need room to expand. A certain angry German fella needed room to expand. So, yeah. Thank you for bringing that up, Beer 31. Greatly appreciated. And Sic Transit, Gloria Mundi, thus passes the glory of the world, a Latin sentence spoken during the coronation of a new pope, while flax is burned to represent the transitoriness of earthly glory. And Fiona, thank you for bringing this up. I greatly appreciate it. This is how the world ends, swallowed in fire but not in darkness. You will live on. The voices of all our ancestors, the voices of our fathers and mothers to the last generation. We created the world we think you would have wished for us, and now we leave the cradle for the last time.
I think that may be a reference to was it Konstantin Tsiolkovsky? He was a Russian thing, and he said, Earth is a cradle of mankind, but one must not stay in the cradle forever.
So, and I will bring up your the thing you put in the private, Lyceum.
Yeah, it was just too long to put in the main chat.
No, that's fine. That's okay. I can read it. I don't care. Yeah. This is from Elysium from the Lurker's Guide. When the colonies offer Earth some help, some probably would offer to help, but if technology is now suspect, some might not want that help. Other colonies might be of the screw them, they got what they deserve perspective. Often politics gets in the way of charity. Yeah, that's true. But of course, I have to, not to be a downer on this and everything, but I do understand Brother Michael's perspective when he says, I am having a crisis of faith. Because it's when you dedicate yourself to an ideal and you dedicate yourself to a path and to a road, and then you have those moments of doubt. And, all of you know how taxing this year has been for me and for the family in general. And I don't want to, but I could honestly empathize to a greater extent with Brother Michael than I could Brother Alwyn. I mean, I understand what Brother Alwyn was trying to do for Brother Michael, and I can understand his perspective and the guidance he was trying to give him, and I can't say I disagree with any of his points, especially the point of faith and reason are the shoes on your feet. You can get further with both than you can with just one. And that's true. You very much can get further with both than you can just one. But at the same time, I do understand where Michael's coming from, because he's like, I want to see the stars. I know, Elysium. Thank you. I'll be all right.
Well, so is one other thing. Like, depending on how many colonies broke away versus stayed with Earth this time around, some of those colonies probably had priceless artifacts on them, like of Earth's actual history. You know, people covering more than just, say, the Clark side of things or the interstellar side of things. They were probably cordoning off certain colonies so that they wouldn't lose more of the picture than they already had, with Earth going all scorched. So I wouldn't even be surprised if it's something like that, or some other fallout from the the Drock plague. You never know. Some of that stuff could have also resurfaced.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Well, the other aspect of that particular segment with Brother Alwyn and Brother Michael is the fact that Rome, quote unquote, still exists for them. And Rome has decided to not recognize the work that they do, not to recognize the monastery or the order in which they function. And that can be very disheartening. But at the same time, I think it pushes you to work even harder. And that is the truly remarkable thing about the human condition. We may get knocked down over and over and over again, but we refuse to ever truly stay down. I mean, you look. All right, full spoilers for everybody who knows this. For Brother Alwyn turns out to be a ranger, and after Brother Michael leaves, he goes to his wardrobe and he pulls out his ranger's uniform, and he says, "We will rebuild the earth, though it take us another 1,000 years." And when he closes his report, he closes it as any good ranger would. We live for the one. We die for the one. And to think that ideal still holds true 1,000 years into the future for the Rangers, the question is, who is the one? That's who I would like to know. That's what I would like to know. And Colin, that's actually a pretty good question. Okay, and I'll bring up Elysium. I'll bring up your comment here.
That's from the Lurker's Guide. Sorry.
Okay, and this is also from the Lurker's Guide for those of you that might be interested. My sense of backstories here is that the Anlashok, the Rangers, moved in and started little abbeys all over the place using the church as cover, but rarely actually a part of it, which is why they had not gotten the recognition and would never get it. Rome probably didn't even know about them or knew them only distantly. That's a very distinct possibility. Because as Brother Alwyn says, the Rangers would be working in secret, quietly, to rebuild what was lost during in the burn. And it's okay. I'll bring up your comment here, Fiona. In part, since the Warlords are introduced with us via telepaths before we were really ready. Yeah, that's true too, Fiona. So
yeah, so we did get uplifted in a way, kind of like how I think it was that one movie with Lockley in it where there was that race that was about to naturally, ascend. And that's why the one soul hunter wanted to be like, oh my God, what's happening here? It feels like mass death, but it really was like mass, ascension. But, the Vorlons didn't really let a lot of the younger races from the current cycle basically uplift themselves. They kind of forced it upon people to be as weapons against the shadows. So
Yeah, exactly. So essentially, but the funny thing is, unintentionally, the Vorlons kind of accelerated the evolution of humanity by introducing telepaths into the bloodline, into the gene pool, and you can probably wager that that elevated or uplifted human that we see in in this episode was most likely telepathic. And obviously, looking at the episode Mind War is the key. The key is the key to human evolution, because it allows us to progress to a form of pure energy like Jason Ironheart did. And of course, we see at the end of this episode that humanity has achieved what the Vorlons achieved. They've evolved to beings of pure energy.
yep. And we decided to move because the Minbari would be like, we don't want to leave Minbar. Humans are good at packing up and leaving. That's how.
Yeah.
So it's like, oh boy.
Essentially, yeah. So.
Because I had a feeling that the Vorlon homeworld probably would have done something like, oh, if nobody moves in here right now when we feel that one of you ascends, then we're going to cause problems. Because it just seems to me that the Vorlons would be kind of trollish that way.
Maybe a little bit,
It's like, we have to make sure we have proper caretakers for our technology. It's like, could you get any more up your own rumps? Wow.
Yeah, they could, and they did. So,
based on what Lena was saying half the time, yeah.
So, but the great thing about this episode, it obviously, like I said, bookends with the scene of Delenn and Sheridan in bed together, and they're talking about we need to get some sleep. We got ratings, and he's like, I'm just thinking back, and he's like, it doesn't matter. You're probably right. It doesn't matter who we were, what we came from, or anything else in 1,000 years or more. What we built was built to last. And then, of course, you have that nice overlay and everything that was, I imagine, written by Straczynski himself. And he says this is dedicated to everyone that made the Babylon Project a reality, and to all the naysayers who said it wouldn't make it. And just ends with 3 words, or 2 words: faith manages. So,
but what I do like about the last segments is they incorporate all the questions that Lorian was asking, that the Shadows and the Vorlons were asking, so that way people can remember to try to encapsulate the whole picture rather than just one part or the other. And I think one of the questions was even what Galen was asking at one point, even in Crusade, like, where are you going? It's nice little tie-in.
Yeah, that's true.
Oh boy, if he's still there. He might still be there. You never know. I know for sure Jason Ironheart probably went over there and be like, "Hi guys," and that's somebody that could tell you about what was happening on B5 from the start.
Yeah.
Or the Great Machine probably had something to do with some of it too, like with keeping the Alliance's history less intact. So it wasn't just propaganda, really. It was actually literally there recording stuff that was happening, because Draw proves that thing can record stuff across very long distances.
Oh, yeah.
Definitely. So, but, honestly, I love, this is probably the most rewatched episode of B5 in the entire series, except for maybe a handful of others. And we did discuss those last week with our top 5 from seasons 1 through 4. And of course, next week we will begin with episode 1 of season 5 and move forward from there. So we will, of course, next week. I imagine we'll discuss it with the council. We'll discuss it amongst ourselves, and I'll send out a message, or one of us will, and everything in regards to when we'll go live and everything. Because of course, next week is, of course, New Year's Eve. So, but anyways, folks, I think we are going to go and wrap up here. But I do want to thank Mounts of Elysium, Fiona Wolf, and Zodrider, even though he had to leave abruptly, for being here this afternoon. And of course, I appreciate you all being here. We appreciate you all being here as well, and with all your insight and your comments and everything else across the board, your little quips, your jokes, and everything. It's all welcome. You all know that. So.
And now
But,
Lita will get the unfortunate Byron as a boyfriend. Oh no, Lita. Oh no. Oh, no.
But before we close out, I want to give Elysium and Fiona a chance to give their final thoughts on this episode before we do close out. So, Elysium, Fiona, the floor is yours.
But I guess my final thoughts is like the reason why I rewatched Babylon 5 is because it does have superversive, uplifting elements more so than basically leaving people in the dirt to like mope. It doesn't allow you to stay mopey, and I can appreciate that.
Indeed, that is true. So, Elysium, your final thoughts.
For me, this would be one of my favorite episodes. I mean, it just shows the humanity of humans. We see it's humanity's worst and humanity's best in the episode. We see our craziness with Brother Alwyn, our doubts about spirituality with Brother Michael. We see the spirituality fulfilled with the descendant and possibly descendant of Sheridan and Delenn when he's finally ascends. And it's just the human story all told in one episode. And I think it's just a marvelous piece of work.
Yeah, I can't say I disagree with that to any extent whatsoever. So, but anyways, folks, again, thank you all for tuning in this afternoon. And for those of you that'll catch us on the replay, make sure you leave your thoughts down in the comment section about our discussion, anything we might have missed, anything that you want to bring up, and let's continue the conversation. So, but that all being said, folks, we will see you all next week at some point. And once again, for myself and the rest of the council, a very Merry Christmas or a Happy Hanukkah or Happy Kwanzaa or whatever you may celebrate this time of year. We will see you next time. And until next time, this is Council of One saying, let's get this right. 3, 2, 1. Zooty, zoot, 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 zoot.
Uh-oh.